Cuber Talk, Quarantine Book Reports.
Good afternoon. My name is Matthew Jobson. I'm a doctor of nursing practice student here at the University of Michigan. And today I'd like to talk about a book called Extreme Ownership, How U.S. Navy SEALs Lead and Win. This book was written by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, who are both Navy SEAL officers who led Task Force Bruiser in Ramadi, Iraq, which is where U.S. forces saw some of the heaviest fighting of the Iraq War. The reason why I chose to read this book is because I spent 4 years in the United States Marine Corps, where I underwent leadership training. However, many of the lessons that were touched on in this book were not taught in Marine Corps training. And when I thought about what leadership was, I thought about leading a team. And there are no greater teams in the military world than the United States Navy SEALs. They're often given the highest priority missions, and very rarely do they fail to accomplish the missions they're given. So what did I learn from this book? I learned to consider what is best for the team, whether that be mission accomplishment, team welfare, who else is to lead in case I become incapacitated. I learned that most often, learning how to lead is a result of failures. Everybody fails, but it's how we deal with these failures that determines what kind of leader we'll be. If you're not humble enough to acknowledge mistakes, you should probably reevaluate your leadership skills, because there's no one else to blame but yourself. I also learned about the premise of this book, which is extreme ownership. Extreme ownership is where you put all of the weight of the success or failure of every mission on your own shoulders. There's nobody to blame but yourself if the mission is not accomplished. In the book, they like to talk about the fact that there are no bad teams. There are only bad leaders. Leadership is the single greatest factor in team performance. Part of it is understanding that it's not what you preach, but what you tolerate. And oftentimes, what you tolerate comes from the people who you are leading. For instance, they talked about a type of person who's called the tortured genius. The tortured genius is somebody who believes that nothing they do is wrong, that everybody else is to blame, and they make excuses for every failure that they suffer. They're just too good or too smart to be bad. I also learned about the concept of belief. In this book, they spoke about how you had to believe in the mission. If you don't believe in the mission, your subordinates won't believe in the mission. And in order to form belief in mission, the primary principle is to ask why. Why are we doing this mission? You need to understand why you're doing what you're doing in order to develop a belief in the mission. And you need to explain to your subordinates why you're doing what you're doing so that they can buy in and believe in the mission. Bottom line is, if you don't understand why you are doing something, or you think what you're doing is silly, you should be asking why. And you should be encouraging others to ask why. Another concept that they touched on is the concept of ego. They acknowledge that everybody has ego. And generally speaking, good leaders are driven by their ego. But there needs to be a balance between ego and humility, because strong ego often clouds judgment. It disrupts planning. It makes it so that you are not readily able to accept advice, and often even affects your own self-preservation. Often, the most difficult ego to deal with is your own. The rest of the concepts that they talk about were laws of war, which you can apply to leadership. The first law of war is to cover and move. Cover and move means to advance and watch your subordinates back. And when you advance, they watch your back. Basically, it boils down to trust. Do they trust you, and do you trust them to have their back when you guys are trying to accomplish a mission? The next concept is the concept of simplicity. If your plans are too complex, oftentimes not all members of your team will understand every aspect of the plan. So basically, what you need to do is you need to keep it simple. People become more focused on understanding the task than completing it when things are too complex. If things go wrong with a highly complex plan, it can often cause more chaos than the plan itself. Another concept is prioritize and execute. Oftentimes, when you have a leader who spreads themselves too thin, they can't meet any of the missions that they've been given. So what Leif and Jocko recommend is what's called prioritize and execute. This is what you use in the military, where you take the top priority and you hit that target, and then you move down to the next target and the next target and the next target. That way we're not spreading ourselves too thin and missing the target on every single objective. If you have the resources to engage more than target at once, you can. But be aware that engaging a new target makes hitting the original target that much harder. The next concept is decentralized command. Decentralized command is the concept that states that every person in the chain of command should understand everything about the mission. They should understand the big picture of why we're doing it. They should understand the roles of their leaders, and they should understand their own role in the mission. If they can understand what's called commander's intent, or the reason why we're doing the mission, then when they're out in the field, they can act without first getting direction from leadership in many cases, saving time, money, and effort. Decentralized command, though, is built on trust. You, as a leader, need to trust your subordinates to make the right decisions. And your subordinates need to trust the fact that if they make a decision, that you will have their back. The next concept is the concept of planning. Planning is the largest portion of accomplishing a mission. You need to describe what the mission is, what are the directives in accomplishing the mission, brief the team before every mission so they get the big picture, the reason behind the mission, the team's individual mission, and each individual person's role within the mission. And you should also be doing what's called leading up and down the chain of command, meaning even if you are not at the top of the chain of command, if you have ideas or you have concerns, then you should be pushing those up the chain of command and not just saying that is above my pay grade. Take responsibility for your actions. Sometimes it's necessary to push your ideas and your concerns up the chain of command. Another aspect is decisiveness and uncertainty. Basically, what that means is that sometimes we need to make decisive decisions without knowing all of the information that we need to make that decision, and sometimes we can't make a decision without all the information. Decisiveness and uncertainty is walking the fine line of knowing when to pull the trigger and when not to pull the trigger. Basically, it's the idea that you need to weigh your options. Finally, one of the largest ideals from this book is discipline equals freedom. If you can implement all the aspects of extreme ownership and get your team disciplined, basically that will lead to greater freedom. Discipline requires control, it requires self-denial. But when the team is disciplined, goals are attained more efficiently. Efficiently attained goals lead to more freedom of time, freedom to innovate, and in some cases, when things go wrong, freedom to adapt when meeting an obstacle. Lastly, I just wanted to touch on a point from the book that really got me, which is the dichotomy of leadership. Dichotomy of leadership are things like you need to be confident and not cocky. You need to be courageous and not foolhardy. You need to be competitive, but also a gracious loser. attention to detail, but don't be obsessed with the details. The ability to lead and the ability to follow, even following people who are technically below you on the chain of command. Be humble, but not passive. Be calm and not robotic, meaning you should be calm, but your subordinates should know that you care and that you have feelings. What I plan to apply to my current role is that I don't currently work. So I was recently elected to be president of the University of Michigan chapter of my camp. I plan on starting to use these leadership techniques that I learned from this book and hopefully hone some of those skills so that when I graduate from this program and I do go out and become a nurse leader, even a junior nurse practitioner, that I will be able to use these techniques to lead up and down the chain of command and lead other nurses in accomplishing missions or goals. So as far as whether or not I made any changes from reading this book, Jocko and Leif both have said that these methods are counterintuitive and difficult to implement. I hope to take these lessons with me in the future and work on implementing them into my leadership repertoire until they become second nature for me. So yes, I do intend to take these methods and use them in the future. Has this book inspired me to read more leadership books? Yes, I have. I have already read many leadership books, so I plan on reading more. So whether or not it inspired me, yes, it did. But in this instance, it's just encouraged me to read more than I do. Thank you very much.